Welcome to Thundering Legion, a podcast by and for Armed Forces members covering apologetics, interviews, and news and events from a Christian perspective. Our mission is to advance the gospel to Armed Forces members of all nations and build Christian community for the purpose of mutual encouragement and accountability. Now, for today's show. Welcome back to the Man After God's Heart Life of David study. This week we are on part 9 when David flees from his son Absalom during the conspiracy. That's in 2 Samuel 15 verses 13 through 23 and then Psalm 3. Quick overview. Part 1, this is the background of David and Saul seeking to kill David. Part 2, David flees from Saul and then acts as a madman in Achish. Part 3, David hides from Saul in a cave. Part 4, David's contact with Ahimelech the priest results in the priest's death. Part 5, David was exiled into the wilderness of Judah. Part 6, David again hides from Saul in a cave. Part 7, we looked at David's victories. And then part 8, the last time we looked at David sleeping with Bathsheba and murdering Uriah. So here we are, and we are now looking at the fallout of what happened as a result of David's sin against Uriah with the murder, and then also the fallout of his relationship with Bathsheba. So we'll hop right into it. And Grady, I think you're going to take 2 Samuel 15, 13 through 23.
And a messenger came to David, saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom." Then David said to all of his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise and let us flee, or else there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Go quickly, lest he overtake us quickly, and he bring down ruin on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword." And the king's servants said to the king, "Behold, your servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king decides." So the king went out and all his household after him. And the king left 10 concubines to keep the house. And the king went out and all the people after him, and they halted at the last house. And all his servants passed by him, and all the Cherethites and all the Pelethites and all the 600 Gittites who had followed him from Gath passed on before the king. Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, "Why do you also go with us? Go back and stay with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your home. You came only yesterday, and shall I today make you wander about with us, since I go, I know not where? Go back and take your brothers with you, and may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you." But Ittai answered the king, "As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king shall be, whether for death or for life, there also will your servant be." And David said to Ittai, "Go then, pass on." So Ittai the Gittite passed on with all his men and all the little ones who were with him. And all the land wept aloud as all the people passed by, and the king crossed the brook Kidron, and all the people passed on towards the wilderness.
All right, so now looking over to Psalm 3, this is titled A Psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. It says, verse 1, "Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. I call out to the Lord, he answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and sleep, I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear though tens of thousands assail me on every side. Arise, Lord, deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw, break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people." All right, Eric, over to you.
Kind of the background of what led to this situation was the passages we reviewed last time, in that we saw David's big fall, that he looked out, saw a woman that he wanted, lusted after her, took her for himself, and then ended up having her husband murdered. Kind of then we go on to see the events are that later on Amnon, one of David's sons, starts lusting after his half sister Tamar, takes her against her will for himself, rapes her, and then kicks her to the curb, and doesn't marry her as tradition would hold, to kind of make her an honest woman. Tamar is Absalom, another son of David's, another son of David's sister. And so, understandably, Absalom's pretty upset with Amnon, and then that builds for 2 years, and then Absalom ends up killing Amnon later down the road. David forgives Absalom for this. He even brings him back to Jerusalem. You don't see any kind of discipline or any kind of fallout from that. In that, Absalom never really gets disciplined for killing his brother. And then eventually, a couple years later, Absalom starts making a play for power. He sets himself up in a chariot with 50 men outside the gate of Jerusalem and essentially starts acting in the role of the king. Anytime somebody has an issue to bring to the king, he intercepts them at the gate and resolves their issue for them, appoints people as judges, really acting in the role of the king on these government issues. And that's once he's usurped the hearts and minds, I guess, of the people of Israel, and has been essentially acting in the role of the king for the last 4 years, that he makes his play for the crown. And that's why you see David fleeing the city, is that Absalom has an army and he's coming to Jerusalem to assume the crown. So the kind of talking points that we're going to dive into is David's legacy as a father, and then what I'm titling leadership void, and then where like justice versus love are kind of the talking points. So the first one, David's legacy as a father, is unfortunately you see. I wonder where Amnon learned that it was okay to take women against their will. Like, oh man, that sounds familiar. It's almost like David did it in the chapter prior. And then also Absalom killing Amnon. It's like, oh man, I wonder where we saw that. Well, that was David, a passage earlier, killing Uriah when he didn't get what he wanted. So we don't see any discipline for Amnon or Absalom for their actions here, and it's interesting to see that we don't really see David involved too heavily in the two situations. So maybe he's busy at work running the kingdom, but it's almost you see a lack of David's presence in his son's lives when these decisions were made. So the discussion point is what kind of legacy are we leaving for our children, and you see the cascading events of how it goes from bad to worse with his sons after David, one, sets the example, and then two, doesn't dive into really correct or discipline these things with his sons. So what kind of legacy are we leaving for our children, and when things start to go bad, what should our response be?
Yeah, I'm looking here at 2 Samuel 12:10. This is when Nathan rebukes David. He says, "Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and you took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own." So I think David has been confronted. He knows his sin, and he knows that there's going to be consequences of that. So one of the discussion points we left off on last week was, does our sin grieve us? And, like, what are the areas of our lives where we want to just kind of hide or minimize sin? But I think when we come to that point of being convicted of sin, something's brought to our attention, what do we do with it? And here I think we see that even if we own the consequences of or even if we own and recognize our sin, that doesn't mean that the consequences are all going to be gone. We saw that the son that was born to David and Bathsheba died. We see Amnon and Tamar, the rape situation that happens. We see Absalom killing Amnon. There's all these things that are the fallout of David's sin. And I think the question there is, how do we respond to our own sin and then the consequences of our sin? And I think that the correct response should be ownership. It should be repentance, turning back to God and seeking to make things right. So I don't know if the situation that David really directly tries to resolve his sin and to pass those lessons on to his kids. It seems like there's a little bit of absence here, and maybe allowing those sin patterns to propagate into his children. I don't know what you guys think.
I think for me, that gins up that question that I've always wondered. Do you think that sin is generational? That's coming, like, passed down? And do you think it was then in this story and that it is today?
I think it's hard, a hard place to be and I think this goes into the next sections as well. But like, who am I to correct my sons when I am just as guilty as they are? I think that's a hard place to be. I had a moment with my own father one time where I had done something and I called him out. I was like, "You did the same thing when you were my age." And he was like, "Yes, but that still doesn't make it right." And even though like I'm not the perfect example, like I can't allow, like, as long as you live under my roof, I can't allow you to continue this. So I think we definitely in generational in the fact that we monkey see, monkey do, right? Like we learn from our parents, but I guess it depends on the parents' response.
Yeah, I definitely think we can tend to become a product of the environment that we're raised in. And I don't necessarily think that generation to generation you're going to repeat the same sins, but here what I see from David is just an environment that's going to harbor sin. And Trevor, I really liked what you talked about when you talked about David taking ownership. And I'll take it even one step further, because I think David, especially in the Uriah case, when he's confronted by Nathan, took ownership and recognized his sin. I just think initially he was kind of blind to it. Like he seems to be very, like his eyes just seem to be shielded almost from the sin that's taking place in his own household, whether it be him, whether it be his kids. It's almost like he's just turning a blind eye to it and completely ignoring it or just not recognizing it. Because like when Nathan talks to David about what he did with Uriah and Bathsheba, he hears the parable, if you will, or the story, the allegory, and is very quick to bring judgment and recognize that what was done was wrong, but he wasn't quick to recognize that the story was him. And I think that we see that with Amnon and Absalom as well. There just doesn't, at least in these passages, there's no mention that David even recognized the sin that was taking place in his own house. And with that, it makes me almost, for lack of a better word, chuckle at Psalm 3, which is titled as being a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. And the first two verses are, Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying, God will not deliver me, but you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. And he's calling out to God in this plea that I almost chuckle at, as he's saying, he's coming very pitifully to God, saying, woe is me. Look at all these people who are against me. Lord, I know that you'll protect me from this, but the situation he's in, he's kind of built his own nest in a sense. He has harbored this environment to where his children can rise up against him and sin against him. And he's falling back on, Lord, look at how tough and challenging my life is right now. And I know you're going to get me out of this, which I appreciate his reliance on God and his loyalty to God and his struggles here. But I don't know. It's almost like he's not recognizing the fact that he did this to himself. I feel like, I don't know, your thoughts.
Yeah, as I'm looking through the Psalms here, and this is something that's always struck me about David, is he has a very sure confidence in his own righteousness. And we
Yeah.
obviously, as studying his life, we know how flawed he is as an individual. Like I'm looking at Psalm 5:12. I had a note referencing this one from Psalm 3:3 because it talks about the shield again. He says, "Surely, Lord, you bless the righteous. You surround them with your favor as with a shield." And there's several other times where David talks about being righteous, and I don't think that he is calling himself righteous as in his deeds are righteous, but I think he is very certain in God's deliverance and salvation that can only come from God because he knows the depths of his own sin. I mean, I think that we even see in Psalm 3:8, from the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. He knows that he needs deliverance from God from his own sin, but he's also certain in God's ability to deliver him. And although he's a flawed individual, which I think is hope for all of us flawed individuals, that is where his certainty and his hope lies. And I think to your point, Eric, about that leadership void, that we kind of see here how those sin patterns that are brought into our families, for him, it's maybe sexual sin, it's these things that propagate through. If we don't take the leadership to stand up and say, hey, these are the mistakes that I made, this is the fallout of it, and like intentionally teach and instruct and point our children towards that greater hope, I think those things are going to continue to fester in the background, and then they're going to become larger to the point where now you have your son leading a conspiracy to take over the kingdom. So I think it's just showing that like avoidance of our sin is not a good strategy, because it's just going to fester in the background and grow to the point where you now have to deal with it, but it's now much bigger and it's caused a lot more hurt and fallout. So it's like the earlier on that we can take that leadership to point people towards their hope that God can heal them, pointing towards God's salvation, that's going to prevent these things from festering.
Segues nicely into the second point, about what's being titled the leadership void here. That again, we see kind of an absence. Like, how, in my mind, how out of the loop do you have to be to not like go through your own city gates to see that your son is running your country from the from the city gate? Like, how often do you have to get out of the palace to be able to see that your country is literally being run by somebody else? Like, everybody's got to see this. For 4 years, he how does David not know this is going on? Or if he did know that it was going on, how did it not get addressed in 4 years that, hey, you're operating well outside of your scope right now? And I know this personally in my own life, going back to the being a father, and like, how can I tell my son he should do certain things when I'm not a good enough example? Like, how much more so even as a king? Like, but the deception there is that we're all flawed humans. You could make the argument that nobody is good enough to do anything, but that shouldn't stop us from doing the right thing, even though we are flawed. So in this case, the leadership void. How do we approach having a leadership position, whether that's being a father or a king, and knowing that you're a flawed, broken human, that you're never going to be good enough to do it perfectly, but yet having that responsibility to lead.
I'm going to go back just a second to something I said earlier, because I just want to make a correction. I think I said something in my previous statement about David seems to just not even be aware of the sin that's taking place in his own household. In 2 Samuel 13:21, it says, when King David heard of all things, he was very angry. And that's in reference to Amnon and Tamar. So just wanted to put that out there. With that, however, there's a note at the end of the verse in my Bible that references a Septuagint ad in the Dead Sea Scroll that said, but he would not punish his son Amnon because he loved him since he was his firstborn.
Mm.
And so I think that is very telling of like that plant. Whereas Absalom in verse 22 and on obviously becomes very angry at Amnon. And I don't know, something that we've talked a little bit about, Trevor, just with disciplining and stuff. But the idea that kind of the bitterness will harbor resentment. And I think that Absalom, as the son, sees David's lack of action against Amnon when he's very angry at Amnon. And I think that kind of breeds this resentment that he feels not only for Amnon, but ultimately for his father, who was in the position to bring justice and didn't. Anyways, sorry, just to put a little bow on that point from earlier.
Yeah, but I think it's showing that he's kind of avoiding the situation
Yes.
a little bit. He's not rising up into his proper place of leadership. I think we see this in multiple areas. Like, as a king, he doesn't seem to be really ruling. He seems to be hiding in his palace.
Yes.
As a father, he doesn't seem to be dealing with discipline issues. He seems to be kind of withdrawn.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that he's probably dealing with the fallout of the sin of the things that had happened earlier. He may be wrapped up in guilt or shame, and he feels unworthy to step into those situations. There might be some selfish reasons where he feels like his firstborn child, he doesn't want to discipline them because he had actually lost his other child due to his actions, the one that he had with Bathsheba. So he's probably wrapped up in all this stuff and hesitant to take leadership. If we withdraw and we ignore, it's only going to make the situation worse. It kind of kicks the can down the road more so, but avoidance is not a good strategy, as we see.
Absolutely.
So what do we do?
Go back to the heart that you were talking about, Trevor, that I in myself am not good enough to do these things, but Lord working through me, or like same thing with our jobs, flying jets. Like, I'm not going to make the right call all the time, but that doesn't mean I can sit back and make no call. I just pray and be like, Lord, I'm a flawed, broken human. I pray that I'm doing your will. But just to stay in the fight, the passage of like well done, good and faithful servant. They equate it to being a race. It's like you got to keep running.
Absolutely. Have I mentioned the topic of organizational grace? Have I talked to you guys about that? Something I've just thought about, and I'll illustrate a little example. I think it's kind of shows what you're talking about, Eric. But let's imagine you are a pilot in the North Korean Air Force or something, and you're like, if I over-G my airplane, or I crash, or I do something wrong, I land, and what's going to happen to me? Like, I might be sent to a prison camp with 3 generations of my family. I don't know if that's actually how their policy works, but let's just imagine for the sake of argument that that's what happens. Like, how are you going to fly your airplane? Like, you're going to fly like robotically, you're going to fly at the center of the envelope, you're not going to take any risks at all. However, if there's grace that is out there and like, okay, maybe I'll make a mistake, but if I make a mistake, but it's an honest mistake, I'll be met with grace. You're going to be a lot more willing to push the envelope and to try things and to take leadership. And I think that's kind of God's grace, on an individual level to us, gives us the ability to take risks. And I think once that filters itself into organizations, then it allows to create a cultural norm of taking risks, obviously within reason. But I think that's kind of the worldview that David is operating under, is that both individually and organizationally, he's able to move forward knowing the assurance that if he makes mistakes, God's going to cover him.
I like that. I like that example. So, but that segues into the last point of where we see this exactly like you were saying, Grady, with he hears about the Amnon and Tamar situation and he's angry, but he doesn't do anything about it because he loves his firstborn. And then you also see even when Absalom rises up against him, he still loves Absalom. He I guess has gone 4 years of watching this unfold right in front of him, but doesn't step in and do something. And there's a passage when his armies go out and defeat Absalom's army. He says, "Don't harm a hair on Absalom's head." And this might be getting into the next section, but he says, "Don't harm a hair on Absalom's head because I love my son." And it actually makes David's general pretty upset that he's like, you love those that hate you and you hate those that love you. Like you just sent your army out there to go risk their lives for you, and yet all you seem to be concerned about is your son that has deliberately gone up against you. So how do we balance that justice versus love, and is it really love if we allow people to continue on a bad path?
It makes me think of Proverbs 17:15. It says, "Acquitting the guilty and condemning the innocent, the Lord detests them both." And so acquitting the guilty, that would mean excusing and failing to punish sin. Condemning the innocent, that would be bringing punishment upon those who don't deserve it. I think that we see that God is both perfect justice and that God is angry and sinful and wrathful towards sin, as he should be, because it's not in characteristic of him. He hates sin, but he also loves the sinner. However, he can't pardon them So that is why David was looking forward to God's salvation. We see that salvation fulfilled in the person of Jesus, who came, took the punishment of sin, drank the cup of wrath for sin on the cross, and ultimately absorbed that. I've heard it said that in order for God to be perfectly just and perfectly loving, that it's kind of like at the end of a criminal sentence, they bring the gavel down and they're like, okay, you're pronounced guilty for the crime that you've done. Here's your punishment that's due to you. And then rather than you getting the punishment, the judge steps off the seat and says, like, here, take me. And then they put the handcuffs on the judge and take him to prison. And then the person who was convicted walks free. It's like justice was served, but love was also served, and mercy. And that's essentially what God did through Christ, was maintaining his perfect loving and just character through absorbing the wrath of sin on himself. And I think that we will never get that right as humans, but we see that fulfilled, and we can try to point others towards the hope we have in God's ability to bridge the gap for us. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think David almost sees these as like two different decisions that have to live separate of each other. Like he could either choose love or he could choose justice, and he chooses love because it's his firstborn in Amnon's situation, and because of his love for Absalom, as one of his sons, throughout the passage. But I don't think that the two have to be mutually exclusive, right? There is a balance, and mercy goes in there as well in this decision on this spectrum of how you could be mercifully just, to love someone, but they don't have to live in separate spaces. Like, if as a father, as a leader, as a king, you have to be just if you love your people. I feel like to lead properly, and it's finding that balance that it's tough.
Like you're saying, Trevor, the acquitting the guilty and condemning the innocent, like he, by not stepping in and handling this in an earlier stage, he essentially condemned a lot of innocent people to death for the resulting war. And by not disciplining his sons, it led to condemning innocent wives. How many sons didn't come home because of the war that got fought? The passage estimates like 20,000 casualties or something from the resulting battle.
Any other thoughts around the room?
In summary, the legacy that David led is that he did sin, he did mess up, but and it was very easy for his sons to follow in his footsteps. That he did have responsibility to still lead his country. He was absent in that role, but maybe it could have been some of the he just didn't want to deal with the consequences of his sin face to face. So how then we go forward is to keep fighting the good fight, to finish the race, and then the justice versus love, that they're not mutually exclusive. But in order to be to love, you also have to be just, especially in that role.
Absolutely. Who wants to close us out in some prayer?
I can pray us out. Dear Lord, we praise you, and we are in awe of your perfect justice and your perfect love. Help us as we strive to do your will, and even as sinful as we are, to remember that you hate the sin but love the sinner. And thank you for this opportunity to come together and dive into your word and get to know your character, and study the life of David. In your name will we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks, dude. Thanks for listening to Thundering Legion. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a rating and review. Please share this episode with another Armed Forces member who needs encouragement in their faith. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode.